Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining in another week. Have a great show planned for you here. Bill Ihlenfeld, former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of West Virginia and current candidate for the West Virginia State Senate here in the 1st District, will be my guest later on in the show. Be looking forward to talking about why Bill got into this race and his background and experience and what he thinks he'll bring to Charleston. But first, let's talk about some of our usual features, and we'll start with a quote. And this one comes from P.J. O'Rourke, who is an American journalist, and says, "Giving money and power to government is like giving whiskey and car keys to teenage boys." And unfortunately, we've seen that can be all too true with a number of things we've seen in government, in politics, and of course the big focus here recently has been the West Virginia Supreme Court. I've talked about this story a number of times on the show, but big developments here this week. The House Judiciary Committee, the West Virginia House of Delegates that is, has recommended and approved 14 articles of impeachment against not just one, but all 4 remaining West Virginia Supreme Court justices. Now, each of the 14 articles don't pertain to all 4 justices, but nonetheless, each of the justices is implicated in at least one or more of the articles of impeachment that have been approved by the House Judiciary Committee. And people may say, well, what does this mean now? Well, the next thing that's going to happen is next Monday, the full House of Delegates is going to convene and will likely vote upon the articles of impeachment that have been approved by the House Judiciary Committee. So all 100 delegates will be a part of that process. The House of Delegates, by majority vote, would have to vote to adopt any particular article. Now, they could adopt one, they could adopt all 14 or something in between, or none if they so choose. But if any article is adopted by a majority vote of the House of Delegates, then it would go to the West Virginia State Senate. And of course, unlike the House that has 100 members, there are only 34 members in the West Virginia State Senate. The Senate would then consider the articles that come to it from the House, and the Senate would have to then adopt any articles of impeachment by a 2/3 vote. So in other words, 23 of the 34 state senators would have to vote in favor of adoption of one or more of the articles of impeachment. If that happens with respect to one or more of the articles, then there would be a trial where it would be determined whether or not the particular justice or justices are guilty of the charges as set forth in the articles that have been adopted. And that trial would have to end with a 2/3 vote by the Senate as well in order for a justice to be found guilty and to be actually removed from office. So that's kind of the process, but there are some interesting twists and turns to this story. Typically, with respect to an impeachment proceeding, remember, a governor can be impeached. There are different state officers that can be impeached, not just a Supreme Court. And when that's normally the case, the state Senate, basically the 34 of them, kind of sit as jurors, if you're thinking about what a trial would be like in a courtroom. But you need to have a judge. And typically, the presiding officer over an impeachment trial in front of the West Virginia State Senate would be the Chief Justice of the West Virginia Supreme Court. So here we have an instance now where Justice Alan Loffrey, who had been the Chief Justice, but was removed from that by his fellow justices earlier this year and replaced by Justice Margaret Workman, who is now the Chief Justice. However, she is one of the individuals that is subject to these impeachment proceedings. Normally it would just go to another justice that would be the acting chief. However, they are all subject to this. So then the question is, who presides over the trial? Now some have said, well, maybe the governor will appoint somebody. Well, there's really no procedure for that, not that I'm aware of, not that I've seen, for the governor appointing someone to act as the presiding officer, or the presiding judge over an impeachment proceeding. So that leaves us kind of in a little bit of a legal quandary and political quandary as to who presides over this trial. Perhaps does the Chief Justice, Justice Workman, would she have to recuse herself, and all the other justices as well, and if she appoints a circuit court judge or senior status judge to serve as acting Chief Justice? That's what happened with respect to the proceedings that are considering the suspension and the ultimate action taken on Justice Loffrey as a result of the Judicial Investigation Commission's findings is that she appointed Judge Tabbitt down in Charleston, a Kanawha County Circuit Court judge, to serve as acting Chief Justice, and then Judge Tabbitt appointed other judges to also sit on the court with respect to those proceedings. Would the same thing follow? Now, interesting twist here, of course, is that could it be Judge Tabbitt again, because she has now filed pre-candidacy papers and to run for the seat that has been vacated as a result of Justice Ketchum's resignation from the Supreme Court, because that is now on the ballot in November, and she's filed for that seat. So does that recuse her now from being able to participate in these proceedings? So as you can see, a lot of legal quandaries here as to how this process would even go if in fact we get to the point of where there's going to be a trial. And of course, let's talk a little bit about these articles of impeachment that have been approved by the House Judiciary Committee. Some of them pertain to some of the things we've talked about on past shows with respect to Justice Lawfrey using a state credit card for personal use, or using state vehicles for personal use, computers and furniture in his home, things of that nature. But there are also some things that pertain to the court in general, such as lack of oversight by not having any policies and procedures for things such as appointing senior judges, overpaying senior judges for serving on different judicial assignments, for these decorating of the offices that we've talked about. Sometimes anywhere from over $100,000 to over $500,000 spent to renovate or decorate a particular Supreme Court justice's office. And basically what the legislature, the House Judiciary Committee anyway, said is that that's a complete maladministration of state funds and the taxpayers' money, and that there was no oversight, there were no policies, no procedures, and that all of that is deserving of impeachment, basically. So a lot of things to be looked at here. I think a very sad day for West Virginia, because what we don't want is the public to have a lack of faith in our court system. And I think it's important to note, none of the things that we're talking about have anything to do with these justices' ability to preside over legal matters, their decision-making process, determining which side is right and wrong with respect to a particular case or a particular point of law or whatever it may be. In fact, I've found as an attorney practicing in this state for nearly 2 decades that our justices are really engaged, and they really listen and try to give everyone a fair shake when you're in front of them. They ask very intelligent questions that are going to examine the issues and really try to get to the bottom and the heart of what's right. And they write extremely detailed, lengthy opinions oftentimes, setting forth what the law is and analyzing why that is the case. So it has anything to do with that. These things that what I would call that have more to do with the administrative part of their office is really what's at the heart of things here. And I hate to see those types of things call into question the competency of the judiciary in our state. Because we have not only fine judges here in the Northern Panhandle that are serving as circuit court judges, family judges, magistrate judges, but also throughout the state of West Virginia. We have some very, very fine judges that I've been in front of throughout the state. So we will continue to keep an eye on this story and see how this progresses. As I said, next week, the full House will be convening on Monday. We'll see what happens, and I'm sure we'll be discussing this on next week's show. We need to take a break. When I come back, I'll have with me Bill Ihlenfeld, who will be my guest this week. Stay with us on the Jamie Bordas Show.
When reviewing your oil and gas offers or royalty check statements, do you wonder, am I being offered a fair amount? Do I feel comfortable reading the statement? Do I have peace of mind? If you answered no to these questions, you need Bordas Mineral Management. Our passion is helping mineral owners protect and expand their mineral wealth. Our examiners tell you whether you're being treated fairly and getting paid what is rightfully yours. Bordas Mineral Management. Be protected. Have peace of mind.
Recommended by the highest authorities. Danoon Lumber.
Looks like a bad one's coming. Yeah. Right?
Welcome back to the show. It's my favorite time each week when I have a guest with me, and really been looking forward to speaking to this particular guest. I've known him a long time, and that's Bill Ihlenfeld, the former U.S. Attorney here for the Northern District of West Virginia and current candidate for West Virginia State Senate here in the 1st District. Bill, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You know, known you, as I said, for many, many years, and known your family, and I was really surprised when I heard, earlier this year back, I think it was in January, that, you were going to be running for this spot. Not surprised because necessarily of you doing it, because I always thought you'd be a great candidate, but surprised because really close to the filing period, there hadn't been a lot of talk about who may run for this seat, and then your name surfaced and you filed, right close to the deadline, and a lot of excitement there by a lot of people when they heard that. So.
Well, yeah, and I was excited about the opportunity as well. It was actually early February, and nobody had filed to run against my opponent, and so the party contacted me and asked if I would be interested in being appointed to run for that slot. And so the party actually appointed me, and I filed, as you said, at the last possible minute, and got in time to get on the ballot in May. And although I was unopposed, it was good to have my name on the ballot, and now I'll be on the ballot again in November.
What prompted, obviously they called and asked you, and it's interesting because you kind of, have a little bit of a history of that to some degree. I mean, you were asked by your country to serve as U.S. Attorney, and you accepted that position, and served nobly in that position for a number of years, but now being asked to serve in this type of position, and you said, yes, I'm willing to do this. What made you say yes when you got that call?
Well, public service runs in my family. My grandfather was the Ohio County prosecuting attorney. He was the mayor of Wheeling. He was a U.S. magistrate judge. My father was a prosecuting attorney. I served as a prosecutor for nearly 2 decades, and so I always planned to get back into public service after I stepped down as U.S. attorney. But when I was asked to run, it was right at the same time as the teacher's work stoppage, and so it was right outside my door, literally just down the street at Triadelphia Middle School, and the Wheeling Park teachers, and I could actually see it and feel it. And those teachers and those school service personnel really inspired me to want to get in, to be a voice for working families, whether they're teachers or they're in the trades or they're troopers. I was inspired by all of their grit and their determination. I wanted to get in and help.
You have a lot of family members that have been involved in education. Your mom, a teacher for many years. I had her at Triadelphia junior high back at the time, now middle school, I think I probably drove a little crazy from time to time, but a wonderful teacher, and with respect to English and journalism and all those types of subject areas. And your sister, of course, in education, that background of family being in education, then your wife works in the schools. So, that had to, I think, affect you in some way too, in addition to seeing, some of the people that are friends, people you grew up with out there on the streets. I was driving by too, and seeing some of the folks that are, that we grew up with. You're a little older than I am, but not too much, and seeing some of those folks out there now that are teachers and saying, hey, I know they deserve better than what they're getting.
Yeah, and so you're exactly right. Because of my family connections and all of my friendships with teachers, I had a little better understanding of what they were going through, because I had sort of sensed the frustration before they decided to go out on the picket line. And I wasn't surprised to see it, because they work so hard, they do so much, they are mentors, and they help our children to become who they become when they grow up. And so they play such an important role in the lives of our children that I wanted to do a little bit more to help them, and I thought by jumping into this race I could be a voice for them in Charleston.
This really has become one of the big issues for this election. I mean, you, especially looking here in the Northern Panhandle. I mean, your opponent Ryan Ferns is the Senate, one of the Senate Majority Leader, and is kind of viewed by a lot of the teachers as being one of the people that was interfering with their efforts to try to get a significant pay increase that they felt they were deserving of, and ultimately got after they stayed out long enough, and the public sentiment was, hey, they deserve this, and that's, I think, going to be one of the big issues here for this election in November.
I agree. What I observed from here in Wheeling, watching what was going on in Charleston was, and also I went to Charleston and I stood with the teachers down there, and my wife went there multiple times, as did her colleagues from Woodsdale Elementary School. I got the feeling that there was a small group of leaders in Charleston who were trying to break the will of the teachers, and their will wouldn't be broken. In fact, at the very end, you probably saw they lined up in a circle. They took a circle, hand in hand, arm in arm, around the entire Capitol complex. It was incredible. They would not be broken, but that small group of legislators did try to do that, And I think that will play a role in this election. I think it's already played a role in a May primary between someone who was against the teachers, who was running against someone who was for the teachers in a separate Republican Senate primary, and the guy who was for the teachers came out on top in that race. And so I do think this is going to play a key part in the elections in November statewide.
Let's talk a little bit about your background and how that well suits you for this type of position. You know, of course, you mentioned you've been a prosecutor. You worked as a prosecutor both in Ohio County and up in Brooke County under Joe Barkey, and worked with guys like Dave Cross up there that have been around for a long time in Brooke County. And then, of course, then the U.S. Attorney, who was, is the chief guy in charge of prosecuting federal crimes here for the entire northern district in West Virginia. So how does that well suit you to now go to the legislature, the West Virginia State Senate?
Well, it definitely gives me a different perspective than most of the people who are serving in the legislature. And we have a lot of great legislators who come from a variety of different backgrounds. But being a federal prosecutor and a state prosecutor allows me to bring the perspective of someone who has attacked the opioid crisis, which might be the greatest threat to the quality of life in West Virginia. I worked on that every day for 7 years as U.S. Attorney. I also worked on it when I was a state prosecutor. So I bring that perspective. I also had to deal with public corruption. We've got a little bit of an issue with public corruption in West Virginia. We've got a history of it, and it seems to be getting worse with what's going on at the Supreme Court and other parts of our government. I formed a public corruption task force. I prosecuted Division of Highway officials. I prosecuted sheriffs. I prosecuted university officials, all who breached the public's trust. And I bring that skill set, that knowledge, that background, and I think I can bring a different perspective and a needed perspective to Charleston if I'm elected.
We need to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue speaking with Bill Ihlenfeld about what some of his plans would be and what he would propose to do if he's elected to the West Virginia State Senate. Stay with us here on the Jamie Bordas Show.
At Ultra Big Bank, we need to be assured you can make your payments. Yes. Well, buy them out. Acquire. As I was saying, I'm not sure I see the value in your small account.
That's when we went to Belmont Savings. They took the time to understand our needs.
And they didn't make us feel small. Where the big banks are only interested in growing, Belmont Savings' interest was in us.
Belmont Savings Bank, focused on your future.
So, how was your first day?
Long. So, Josh asked me about you.
Daddy's home. Go get him.
For your home, for your life, for more than 50 years. The Hardwood Specialists. DeNoon Lumber.
Welcome back to the show. I've been speaking with my guest, Bill Ihlenfeld, former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of West Virginia and candidate for the West Virginia State Senate here in the 1st District. And Bill, before we went to break, we were talking a little bit about what gives you kind of a different perspective or what you'll bring to Charleston. And you're talking about having, been the prosecutor, both federal prosecutor, state prosecutor, but also, one thing people may not realize is you're also a family guy. And, I think that's important to people in West Virginia because they care about what's happening to our kids and what the future may be for our kids. And you bring the perspective of a family guy as well to this.
I do. I'm extremely proud of my wife and our 3 kids. We both are very proud. We have 3 teenagers. One's off to college and 2 are in high school. And what motivated me every day as U.S. Attorney when I got up in the morning was I looked at the pictures of my 3 kids, knowing that the work that I did not only helped them, it helped all the children in the Northern District, whether they were the drug issue or sexual predators or violent criminals, all of those things. I was motivated by my children and enjoy not only helping them, but helping all of the children in the Northern District. So I think that does play a role. And just having been a parent, and you're a parent, raising kids is challenging, but I've certainly learned from it. I've become, I think, a better person, a more understanding person, and your kids try to pull one over on you once in a while, and I learned how to see through those tricks sometimes, and I think it would make me, puts me in a better position to serve this state in the legislature.
One thing I found is it really helps with your patience to some degree.
Yes.
It's you have to be patient, and my patience is still not where I want it to be, but it's gotten better. And
Right.
I think as a parent, you just find that you have to do that.
Absolutely.
let's talk a little bit about what you would plan to do in Charleston. I've followed your campaign here, and one of the things you've talked about is an inspector general, if I'm using the right term, I think that's what you've proposed. And I first saw that, what's he mean by that? So maybe explain what that would be all about.
So what I think we need in Charleston is someone to be the government's watchdog. And I wish we didn't need to have a watchdog in Charleston, but with all that we've seen since this year began, especially with the Supreme Court, what's been uncovered, some great reporting that has uncovered extravagant spending at the Supreme Court. We need someone to keep an eye on the government, somebody who would be independent of the legislature, somebody who would truly be the government's watchdog. In an office like that, people say, well, how are you going to pay for that? It would pay for itself. It would be someone who would look out for fraud, waste, and abuse and have the authority to investigate and prosecute those kinds of offenses. Other states have this kind of a position. We don't, and we need it. We desperately need someone. And the reason we need it not only is to clean up the fraud, waste, and abuse, but it's to restore the people's trust in government. You talked earlier in your show about people losing faith in our judiciary, and I hate to see that just as much as you. We need to restore that faith, not just in the judicial branch, but in all branches of government, and something like that could really do that for us and for our people.
You mentioned other states doing it. I think that's one of the I guess, benefits of someone in your position, or that's been in your position as U.S. Attorney, is that, as a U.S. Attorney, you dealt with people from all different states. You had colleagues, whether they be in Wisconsin or Colorado or Texas or wherever, because you go to conferences, I'm sure, and you with other U.S. attorneys, and you're talking about what are the issues in those states and how are they attacking those issues.
Exactly. That was one of the greatest things about being the U.S. attorney, was developing those relationships with people from across the country and borrowing their ideas. I brought ideas back to West Virginia that were presented to me by my colleagues in the U.S. attorney community, and I think that's another thing I would bring to the table, is just the connections that I've made over the years in dealing with people from throughout the country who have great ideas. The other thing that I've learned is some great ideas going on right here in our state that need to be spread throughout. There's good things going on in Martinsburg that the rest of the state needs to take a look at. Good things going on in Huntington, and I don't think there's anything wrong with borrowing an idea and spreading it and bringing it here to the Northern Panhandle.
You kind of kicked off your campaign earlier this year up in Hancock County, and I thought one of the interesting things you did when you kicked off your campaign was tell a story about your son, Charlie, running for student council president at Philadelphia Middle School, and how you kind of even borrowed his campaign slogan, and maybe share that with our viewers, because I found, maybe it's because I have kids, that myself, and I like that type of story, but maybe share that with the viewers.
So, as I said, when I kicked off my campaign, politics in the family was supposed to be left to Charlie, because he really is if there's a politician in our household, it's him. Well, he decided to run for student council president, and his campaign was based upon expanding activity period and adding some clubs to that activity period, a fantasy football club, a wide variety of clubs, the STEM club, et cetera. And he had to give a speech to the entire school, and so you have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders voting, and it was him against 3 others, and they were all girls. And so I thought he probably had a good chance, because he was the only boy in a middle school election, and most of the boys would probably vote for him, and most of the girls would vote for the girls and split up the vote. But anyhow, he looked at the camera when he gave his speech, and they broadcast it throughout the school, and he said, "I'm Charlie Ihlenfeld, I'm running for student council president, and I've got your back." So I asked him if I could borrow that as my slogan, and he agreed. And so, and it really is the slogan of my campaign is, I've got the backs of working West Virginians, working families, whatever they might do. There's so many people struggling to achieve a living wage, and that's what I would do if I go to Charleston, is have the backs of those people, and Charlie gave me that idea.
That's pretty cool that you could borrow that from your son, and I'm sure he likes that too. I gave that speech, not that speech, but I had to give this. I was president of student council when I was at Philadelphia many years ago. So it's a little nerve-wracking to have to give a speech, that the whole school is going to see, and what do I say, and what's not going to sound kind of goofy or whatever. So it's a little intimidating to have to do, but good for him for having the courage to run for that and to get involved, and a lot of fun too, and I'm sure he did a great job. So
we're really proud of him.
Yeah. Well, Bill, hey, thanks for being on the show today. Good luck with the rest of the campaign. November will be here before we know it, and I know you've been making the rounds throughout the district, going all the way from Hancock County down. So keep up the good work, and best wishes to you.
Thanks, Jamie.
Appreciate it. We need to take a break. When we come back, we'll just have a little bit of time to talk sports. Stay with us here on the Jamie Bordas Show. People in nursing homes are some of the most vulnerable members of our society. They're there because they can't take care of themselves. Those facilities have a duty to take care of our loved ones, and when they don't, it's important they're held accountable. We've not only collected record results against negligent nursing homes, but more importantly, we've helped so many families get the answers and closure they so badly needed.
Bordas and Bordas, fighting for justice.
Disasters happen. Pick the team that takes care of them all. Powered by offices in Wheeling, Morgantown, and Pittsburgh, Panhandle Cleaning and Restoration is ready to handle any size emergency at a moment's notice. We have the right people, knowledge, and equipment to respond 24 hours a day.
I'm Dana Hogerson. When disaster strikes your home or business, tell your insurance provider you prefer the restoration company the Mountaineers call, Panhandle Cleaning and Restoration.
Welcome back to the show. It's time to talk sports and start off with the Pittsburgh Steelers. You know, people a little bit worried the Steelers preseason schedule's underway and thinking, look, no Ben, Brown's hurt, no Le'Veon Bell. Don't worry, it's just the preseason. Preseason football doesn't matter that much. It's when the games really start in September that it matters. So don't get too concerned about what happens in the preseason. One way or another, I say never get too high, never get too low about what happens in the preseason. Speaking of football, Mountaineers are underway with practice as well, and a lot of optimism in Morgantown and around the state of West Virginia for that season. But just be a little bit cautious. I mean, the offense, you know, Will Greer back and all that firepower, but still have to stop people. And I always say, you got to play great defense to be a really great team, and that concerns me a little bit. Is this defense going to be able to stop anybody? So I'm excited about the Mountaineers too. Looking forward to seeing Will Greer back out on the field, but the defense has me a little bit concerned until I see what they do. The big game, of course, the opener against Tennessee Labor Day weekend on Saturday that weekend. And speaking of, you know, things down the road and holidays, not just Labor Day weekend, but Christmas shaping up to be a big basketball day for the NBA. Announced 5 games on Christmas Day, including some big matchups between the Thunder and the Rockets, the Celtics and the 76ers, and the big 8 o'clock Eastern game, which will feature the Los Angeles Lakers, the LeBron James-led Los Angeles Lakers, not Kobe Bryant, against the defending champ Golden State Warriors. That'll be 8 o'clock Eastern, so after you have your full Christmas day, be able to check that game out. That's all the time we have this week. Thanks for joining in again. We'll see you next time on the Jamie Bordas Show.